Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Postnatal Minds, the podcast. This is episode two, part two on achondroplasia with my friend Fran. I'm going to do that because I think she's there. Welcome back, Fran. As you can see, there's an array of balloons behind me. We celebrated Alba's fourth birthday at the weekend, and I'm still tired. I need to do a whole podcast on how doing parties for children is exhausting. It was like a military operation, and yeah, I'm shattered. But we're here and we move. And I know that Fran, you've just had George's as well, and you equally found it exhausting. It's a bit like a wedding. Well, I'm not married yet, but it's a bit like what I think a wedding would be like. You're in it, you don't really enjoy it, and then you look back and you're like, oh, it's lovely, but at the time you were not enjoying it that much, getting through it.
Yeah.
So this episode we are going over kind of the first year of the boys' lives, and delving in a little bit more to the monitoring they have, some more facts and information about the condition and some of the things that babies and the boys with achondroplasia and children with achondroplasia might face. So we finished the last episode with the birth of the boys and obviously that deviation straight away, all those fears that you had when they're not in front of you. And then the appointments start, and that brings a whole new load of emotions. So, Fran, do you want to run through how those first few weeks look?
Yeah, sure. So, literally, the second he had arrived, all of my fears, worries, everything, it just went away like in such a quick snapshot. And he was just there, and I was just so excited to be his mum and love him and welcome him to the world. And I was also really worried about getting postpartum depression and anxiety and stuff like that. I know we'll probably touch a bit more about that later on in this episode, so I'll just talk about George. So yeah, we welcomed him. We didn't have a very long hospital stay, luckily for us. So he was born by C-section, as I mentioned in the last episode, and he came out fairly straightforward. So he did a poo in my tummy. I think it's called is it meconium? Is that right? So they had to do a couple of tests on him for that, and he took a little bit longer to breathe than they would otherwise expect, but he wasn't blue or anything, and he didn't need any further support. They just had to rub him down. But I think that's a C-section and an achondroplasia thing, because when you babies born by C-section, they don't have all the liquid and the fluids squeezed out of them when they come out of the birth canal. So that's one reason why he was a bit phlegmy. And then the other reason is achondroplasia. So as Rosie mentioned in the last episode, all of their ENT systems are much smaller, so there's a much higher chance of them getting congested. So apart from the poo and the little rubbing bit of breathing, he was absolutely fine. They tested him, I think, gosh, having to remember now, I think it was every hour for the first 12 hours that they tested him for his levels and anemia and stuff like that. But he was absolutely fine. And then we were actually discharged quite quickly. I think we only stayed in hospital, I think it was only 2 nights. And then we got discharged on the third day and then came home. And then you're home with a newborn baby and you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is crazy. I'm responsible for another human being and I can't even look after myself. But here we are. But I can't actually fault the support that I had coming out of hospital. And because of the way I went through the hospital system at the end of my pregnancy, because I was admitted for my mental health, I had, going through that pathway, a huge amount of support. So I had a crisis team check up on me every day just to make sure that I was okay. And they would call before they came round, and then they would come have a cup of tea. It was actually very nice. And so I had that for the first couple of weeks. And then for George, we got referred really, really quickly to the Evelina Hospital. So the Evelina Hospital is, I think, the leading hospital in Europe for achondroplasia. So we're really lucky. It's only half an hour away from us. So that's his main hospital of care. We got referred to them really quickly because of everything that happened to us at the end of the pregnancy, and the hospital wanted to make sure that we were receiving really good care, which they did. So when George he must have been about 3 weeks old. Yeah, he was 3 weeks old. We had our first appointment with the Evelina team, and first time George went on a train as well, public transport. And so a lot of firsts for us as well. So it was a big day. We got to the Evelina. So if anyone's ever been to a children's hospital, they're really weird environments. And I say the word weird because the care that you receive at the children's hospital, from my experience, is nothing short of outstanding. However, you're also in a children's hospital where there are a lot of other very sick children. So that can feel a bit scary.
Yeah, it's definitely perspective, isn't it? And also,
Yeah,
when you're so early on in your journey, I remember that first appointment at Evelina and being like, still like, cannot believe this is me and my life, and that I'm like walking through a door of a children's hospital, which now I look back, I always say I was so naive to disability and difference, and particularly with children, because there's a whole other world out there, like from our admissions to Evelina, seeing their parents every single day coming up for the children that are in their long term. The work is incredible. They've got school there, they've got, so many different activities. But yeah, it's definitely kind of a wake up call. I think if we think back to the crew we've got with the boys and the girls with achondroplasia, they have all definitely kind of at that first appointment had that like really overwhelming feeling of, oh, like you're here. And I remember that first appointment really well. I don't know about you, but I remember being really fearful and again, like not in a great place mentally to take information in, and being quite nervous about what they were going to say and what they might do. And we know now we didn't have anything to worry about because they're a lovely team. But yeah, they see a panel, don't they, basically of consultant, OT,
yeah.
physio, and a nurse.
And a nurse, yeah. Yeah, you're just bringing me right back to all those emotions, Rosie. Like for me as well, like I had a really big fear that the team in the hospital didn't think that I could look after my baby properly because of what happened to me before pregnancy. So I was feeling like that they were all hyper looking at me as if to be like, what type of mum is she? Is she capable of looking after this baby? And
Yeah,
I
you're
was.
so vulnerable anyway at that time. You're so vulnerable. Like I remember when I had Alba, like feeling so nervous about even walking to the shops. Like I cannot imagine at that stage having had to have got on a train for the first time and do that.
Yeah, so I was feeling really scrutinized myself personally. And that for me was like an overwhelming feeling. And also like the no sleep. Let's not let's not brush on that. He was 3 weeks old. Like don't think I'd slept solidly for more than like 2 hours
Well, yeah,
by this point. So
you're actually in another world, and as any parent listening will know, you have a bad night's sleep, and you are so much more emotional and incapable of processing, normal day to day, even just talking. So yeah,
it's a lot because you're in this big room, as Rosie said, with the big team. You know, you're having all these big emotions, big feelings, and you're sleep deprived. So it's yeah, it's quite a lot to take in. It was a long old appointment. I think ours went on for nearly 2 hours, and they literally run through like achondroplasia 101. This is how you look after your baby. And then we did BLS afterwards, which was basic life-saving skills. And I remember the nurse like wanting us to do all like the choking and the CPR, and I was like freaking out about that as well. But then I just remember being so tired and I couldn't really take it in because like I was trying not to fall asleep in the chair.
so Fran, they see Evelina every 6 months, aren't they? But you do end up seeing Evelina a little bit more during that time because they have their first MRI at around, I think Arlo was 6 weeks. I don't know how old George was when he had his first one.
He was a bit older than that, I think, because he was just on the cusp of being too old for the feed and wraps.
Yeah, they like to feed and wrap on the first one. And again, like that all went well for us. And I wasn't sure how it was going to go because we were breastfeeding. He initially went in and he was fine. And then he did wake up and then he was crying and they were like, don't we need to get him out? And I was like, no, can you just get it done? And he went back to sleep with the noise because they're quite loud. But I remember having a real moment of again, like, oh my God, like my tiny little bit, because you're allowed in the MRI, aren't you? You're even allowed to like touch their arm and their leg. And I remember even having a moment then of being like, gosh, like what is going on? Like I'm in this room and my tiny baby's in this huge tube and feeling like it was all very unfair. But yeah, but then I had to kind of ground myself and be like, no, a lot of babies have to have MRIs after birth. But yeah, they have two MRIs in their first year, aren't they? Don't they? And Fran, you might be better placed to explain why they're having MRIs.
Yeah, so ours unfortunately didn't go quite as well as yours, Rosie. We tried to do the feed and wrap with George. So, feed and wrap, for anyone who's listening who isn't sure what we're talking about, it's basically, if anyone's had an MRI, you know that these huge sort of tubes that you have to sit deathly still in so they get the imaging right. Now, for anyone that you can verbally explain that to, it's fine and you don't need any form of sedation. But for a newborn baby, you can't tell them to be still and then listen. So you either have to have them asleep and swaddle them so they're super still, or you have to sedate them. So we tried to feed and wrap with George. So I breastfed him and then he was swaddled. But again, for anyone who's had an MRI, they are super loud. So you've got like the loud whirring white noise, but you've also got there's a constant beat. And George got very upset by that. So, and I just remember, like you, Rosie, I just burst into tears. I was crying, George was crying, and it was just all a bit of a mess, really. So they had to stop it, which meant that we then had to do another one under general anaesthetic, and that comes with a whole host of other worries. But going back to the reason for the MRI, so every child with achondroplasia, or every person, I should say, has some form of narrowing at the base of the skull. And the narrowing is where the spinal cord goes through the sort of tubing from the skull to the spine, and this is called the foramen magnum. And what can happen in children with achondroplasia is there can be a narrowing, like a bit of bone that digs into the spinal cord, and that can cause pressure and nerve damage. And the reason why that's important is that can actually have some really serious side effects. It can delay their developmental milestones, it can delay their cognitive milestones, it can affect their breathing. And in worse, it can cause hydrocephalus, which is an enlarged head and fluid in the head. And in 5% of cases, it can cause death if it's left untreated. And then it can also cause pain and discomfort as well. So it's quite serious, scary side effects there. And the grading of the narrowing is done 1 to 4. So 4 is the most severe and 1 is fine. They don't operate on grades 1 and 2. They will just monitor. And grades 3 and 4 is where they like to operate. Not all grade 3s, depending on the age of the child, but most of the time they will, just as a precaution. And George, unfortunately, was a grade 4 narrowing. So we had to have an operation on George when he was 6 months old for that. But yeah, I'll just stop there. Rosie, I don't know if you want to chime in and say anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, Arlo was a grade 2. We actually went into an MRI machine when he was still inside me. I think it's part of one of their research studies. But yeah, we actually went to St Thomas's and had an MRI, so I've got images of him inside my tummy, and they actually graded him at a 2 after that. And then in his 6-week MRI and his last one, which was around his first birthday, which was under general, he remains at a grade 2. But no, you just explained that really well there. So Frank, can you tell us a bit about, so you had the call, and I remember when you had the call to say that George was a grade 4 and that fear. I mean, even remember having fear and sadness for you and just being like, I don't know how they can cope with this, like on top of everything else, and just my heart really going out to you guys. But also, we've learned in the first step of part 1 of this episode that you have a predisposition to feeling low and anxious. So on top of that, it must have just been incredibly difficult news to receive. So you just tell us about that and what followed.
Yeah, I mean, because I'd already been through at this point, the two MRIs. So the first one I cried. The second one was even harder because you had to go under general anaesthetic, and that was just heartbreaking. Seeing him go all floppy and under sedation. Yeah, obviously cried my eyes out. And then after that, you kind of, hope for the best. But yeah, it's not actually Evelina that do the surgery. So Dr. Thompson is based at Great Ormond Street Hospital. So yeah, we had a meeting with him. They told us that it was a grade 4, and it's that heart in stomach, heart in mouth kind of feeling. I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to have to, because I already knew how hard it was seeing George go under general anaesthetic just for an MRI, and that was no procedure. It was just, fairly quick and easy. He was only gone for, maybe 20 minutes or so. To know that they're going to have to operate on near his brain and his spinal cord, and your mind's just going a million miles an hour.
So scary.
But at the same time, you're having all these big emotions and you're feeling scared and worried. But then at the same time, I was feeling I'm his mum. I am his safe space. I need to show him that I am strong for him and I
Stay
can help
practical
him through.
mode.
Yeah, and I was like, I can't I don't want to say indulge because that's the wrong words, but that's the word I'm going to use for the moment. I didn't want to indulge in my sadness or anxiety about my feelings. Yeah, I wanted to be, I am here and strong for George. So let's do right by him and let's make this the best possible outcome for him. So when we met with Dr. Thompson, the surgeon, so you have a proper full meeting with him before you have the operation, of course. I came with reams and reams of notes on my phones of questions and
Oh, I'm not
questions, and I was like, "That's
surprised.
the
Like, it is a very intimate, scary operation. I think any mum would have done, dad would have done the same thing. I don't think that's anything to like be surprised about.
yeah." So that was my way of not letting, I think, the emotion run away and just letting the practical side of my brain sort of take over and really run with that. I think some of my biggest fears were, had this surgeon, Dr. Thompson, had anything go wrong in surgery in his experience, because yeah, I just couldn't bear the thought of that. Luckily, he said he hadn't, but he knew that other surgeons had, and obviously, surgery is not it's an art. It's not a this happens, so therefore this will happen. So he was like, I can't guarantee everything, but he was like, to date I've never had any adverse. So that gave me some reassurance. Another big thing for me was, if we don't do it and we don't operate, what is the outcome if we just leave it and let George be and we don't interfere too much? And then Dr. Thompson said he could be fine. He was like, but there is, and that's when he said that's where the 5% chance of death came. And he was like, and actually he's known that children where they have an MRI so early come in with can all of a sudden present very serious symptoms and then have to have the operation under emergency circumstances. And those just weren't chances that Greg and I were prepared to take with George and his health and his life. I had concerns about, him continuously going under anaesthetic quite a lot. I didn't want that to, possibly stunt his, limited growth or his development. So we were asking all those sorts of questions. But Dr. Thompson, he was very reassuring. He had a brilliant bedside manner. He was actually really good. He drew what the narrowing looked like in his skull, and he explained it really well. And then we actually saw the MRIs, and to be honest, even from my untrained eye, as soon as he got it up on screen, it was so obvious that George had quite a severe narrowing. Because, sorry for those who are listening and can't see this, but like a normal spinal cord is like this, and then George has literally had like a little bit of bone like digging in there, and there was like, it was like someone stepping on a hose pipe. That was how you described it. So they just go in and shave that bit of bone off.
I was going to say, so tell us what did he actually do in that operation for George?
Yeah, so that's I didn't ask as many questions as like I should have. The morning of the operation, my goodness, it's because the other thing that's really, really difficult about having a child or a baby go under general anaesthetic is you can't feed them. And for young babies who feed every hour, 2 hours, that is excruciatingly hard. So that was so tough. And George was just screaming and screaming, and he couldn't understand why I wasn't feeding him, and he was getting so upset, and that was really upsetting. So that I found that really tough. But in the actual operation, so what they do is they make an incision in the back of the neck at the base of the skull, and then they go through and then they open it up, and then they go through where the spinal cord is, and then they shave that bit of bone off, and then they stitch everything back up. But what they also do, which I didn't realise until after the operation, is they put electrical nodes all around the skull, and then they measure the electric currents in the brain, and that can translate to how much pressure there is from pre and post them shaving the bone off. So when George came round from the anaesthetic, I wasn't expecting to see all these nodes because they leave little marks all on his head. So they almost look like cigarette burn marks all around his skull.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I was really, oh my gosh, what is this? But George had to go into intensive care into recovery because of his obstructive sleep apnea. So anesthetics can cause you to desat, so your oxygen levels to drop too much when you're recovering from anesthetic. And if you've got sleep apnea as well, that can just put you in quite a precarious position. So George went into intensive care, and we were right, it's literally the second they wheeled him out of surgery, me and Greg were there right by his bedside, because I didn't want him to be awake and him not know that we were there. But bless him, he was so out of it on morphine and all the painkillers that he had no idea what was going on, poor little man. But that was another thing I didn't realize. A question that I didn't ask is, they pain relief. I didn't know that you could give babies morphine, but yes, they gave babies morphine. And he was just so lackluster, bless him. And he had so many
How long
wires
was
and
the
things.
operation for?
It was a long time. He was away from us for 5 hours.
Wow.
And again, that was the longest I've ever been away from him because he'd never left my side at this point. So he was 6 months old when he had his operation, just turned 6 months.
I bet your boobs were like waiting to feed.
Yeah, I was. So when the hours that I wasn't with him, I was pumping, and then when he came round, he couldn't be fed by me. He had to be fed through a tube. So I was pumping. I had so much breast milk. He didn't have that he couldn't, but they had to put it in a little syringe up his nose, and that's how they fed him. So I couldn't even feed him for over 24 hours after recovery, and that was hard as well. Yeah, just bless it. I think the hardest thing is because when he came round from the operation, he just looked like a shell of himself, and like George has got so much personality, and that had just all gone. And then I just remember like looking at Greg, and we both looked at each other, and we both were like, oh my gosh, what have we done? And then it's like, because you think, is he going to be like this forever? Is this George? Have they done something to his brain? Yeah, and then you just go into like this spiral. But of course, he's just come out of major surgery. He's only been awake for half an hour. Of course, anyone would be like that. But until he started perking up, which he didn't, and until maybe like the second or the third day, I was really concerned. I was really worried because he didn't really react when he saw me or Greg. Yeah, that was hard.
So he recovers from up really well. You get home, and obviously the operation was a success, and there weren't any complications. And how's he doing now? And what are there any other follow-ups? Because I know he's had MRIs, hasn't he, since that to check on the progress.
Yeah, so he, as scary as it was when he came round, children bounce back so quickly. Literally after 48 hours, he was back to his normal self again. And then the day we got back from hospital, he, bearing in mind he still had like huge dressing on the back of his head and everything like that. He rolled for the very first time the day we got back from hospital, which I just could not believe. I put him down on his little playmat, and then he just started like trying to roll. I was just like, what are you doing? But the hospital physio said, look, don't make him do any movement, but any movement he wants to do on his own is fine. And, just keep up the pain relief. And he was just rolling away for the first time. So that was
I
incredible.
mean, it's very George of him, to be honest. Very George of him.
Yeah, and he's been going from strength to strength. So after the operation, they did a CT scan and another MRI, and that all came back as fine, because there is a risk of doing this operation in very young children that it grows back. So they do have to keep monitoring. So it will mean a few more general anaesthetics for George, because there's absolutely no way that he will sit still through an MRI.
I mean, you're like a general anesthetic pro now. You're a total pro, so you'll be fine.
It doesn't get easier. It really doesn't. I cry every single time. It does not get easier. But I just, you get more acclimatized to the hospital setting and what to
Yeah, it's more
expect. But yeah,
familiar, isn't it? I
yeah,
remember when Arlo had his general anaesthetic for his latest MRI. He went down quite early. He had the no feeding thing, so he was really grumpy, but he went down quite early, which I was really grateful for. And she was really experienced. And Arlo was at more risk because he's got his sleep apnea and he's under respiratory here locally in Brighton. So there was a whole ordeal in getting this all signed off anyway. Um, but yeah, I remember when he went under and that wait being so long, and that was not even half as long as yours. Um, and obviously you cannot relax at all, can you? But I remember leaving him because give them the general whilst they're in your arms, and like you said, they go floppy, and then you just hand them over. And it's like the most unnatural thing ever. And I remember just yeah, like crying my eyes out. And also when I went down to get him, like you, feeling really sad because he was so upset, and he definitely recognized Lloyd and I as well because his crying stopped when we arrived, and it was just like, oh. But yeah, I also remember feeling quite angry with the world that he had to go through that. Even as a like, just as an investigative thing, it is a strange position to be in. But yeah, like you said, they don't get easier. It is a very unnatural thing to have to go through as parents. So that kind of covers the MRI monitoring, and then alongside the MRIs, they also have sleep studies, which ours have all been at the Evelina. Um, So sleep study is when you stay overnight. The baby is covered in wires and nodes and tubes and bits and bobs. And again, the first one of those was always a bit scary, wasn't it? Because you were like, how on earth am I going to get any sleep? How are they going to measure sleep? I remember them saying to me, what time does he go to sleep? And he was like 6 weeks old. And I was like, you okay, hon? Like, he doesn't have a bedtime yet. Like, I don't know, 10 p.m. And then when I went back, when he was a bit older, I was like, yeah, he does have a bedtime, and it says it. And it's like, yeah, I'm getting there, I'm getting through that. But I mean, yeah, Arlo never tolerated the nasal thing that came straight out. But Arlo's first, that was our rocky patch actually, because Arlo sleep study at 6 weeks. He was at the end of like his first bronchial illness, and then Evelina called me on like the Friday night and said we'd like to see him on Monday because we're a bit worried about his numbers. So Lloyd and I took him up on Monday, waited all day to see respiratory, and she took one look at him and was like, "Yeah, he needs to be admitted. He's not well. He's going to be in hospital for weeks. We need to get him on CPAP." She was like, "NG tube, CPAP, he's going to be here for weeks because we need to get him to a weight where we can send you home with a CPAP machine. And we were just floored. Like, I didn't even have any stuff with me, anything. We'd gone up from Brighton. So Lloyd had to come back to get Alba, and I stayed with Arlo. And that was hellish because, again, he had to be pinned down to have an NG tube. I remember just having to step out of the bay and cry my eyes out because it's just, again, such an unnatural, horrible thing to witness. And she was like, no more breastfeeding. He's too tired. So I was like, you pumping, pumping, pumping. So stressed. My milk supply was impacted. And yeah, it was a lot. But I remember a really nice stranger coming to hug me that was in one of the other bays, just saying it'll be okay. And I was just like, this cannot, like, you're in practical mode, but it's so overwhelming. You just can't process it. You're just, when things are sprung on you like that. And that was the start of Arlo basically getting sleep apnea diagnosis. And early this year in March, he was actually admitted to hospital the night of his christening. I remember it very well. His sats dropped and he actually ended up on a CPAP machine, which for those that don't know what a CPAP machine is, it's basically help breathing. It's kind of a mask that throws air up the nose. And he hated it. And he actually got pressure sores from trying to wrestle it off so much. And that was an extremely hard time for us. And once he'd recovered from all of that, he got another sleep study done. They were trying to get him on CPAP at night at home. And I was like, please, no, because he hated it so much. And then actually, his last sleep study was a lot better. So he's got mild obstructive sleep apnea now, which we can manage. He's got a nebulizer at home for when he does get colds and bronchial illnesses, which has been really helpful. And the respiratory team here locally are brilliant. He's also on long-term azithromycin antibiotics to try and keep the bugs at bay. And I always get quite nervous this time of year, kind of October, November, December, January, because as we all know, that's when the winter bugs come, and he's now at nursery. So it's always just quite a nerve-wracking time because I know when he gets a cold, with their flattened noses, like one bit of snot in their noses, and they just really struggle to breathe. And then that can obviously lead to weakness and lack of eating and and weight loss, which we don't need for them. So yeah, where are you at with sleep studies, Bram?
So we've had 5, but the reason we've had 5 is because he had one before his operation, and that showed severe obstructive sleep apnea. But then they were lining us up to have CPAP, and he got fitted for that. But they did that again at our local hospital here in Tooting. But then because he was having the operation, they were like, let's wait until after the operation to do his CPAP because that might improve his breathing. So after his operation, we had another. So he had 2 before his operation, and then he had 3 following. But only one of those was in hospital in the Evelina. The others were at home. But the at-home ones, to be perfectly honest, were rubbish because rips everything off. Impossible to keep it on him, and I just couldn't stop him from taking the wires and everything off, so that had to be done in hospital. But luckily, the latest one that we've had has shown that he's still got severe obstructive sleep apnea, but it's shown improvement since the last. It's just less severe than the severe that it was before. So they are holding off CPAP for now. But yes, like Arlo, any cold or anything, the amount of snot and oh my gosh, the snoring as well that comes at night when they are congested. It is like sleeping next to a pneumatic drill. Walk. That's exactly what.
Waterfalls. They're so cute though.
No, but shame and then they really struggle to feed and stuff like that. So yeah, Rosie, like you, I'm really cough and cold season. But yeah, that's where we're at. We've done the 5 sleep studies, and I don't think we are due any soon. I think they're just allowing George to continue as he is for the moment.
Yeah, and that's nice, isn't it? Because we've all got a bit of a theory that we just let them grow a bit, everything will get better anyway. Which brings me on
Mm.
to their spine, which we spoke a little bit about in the last episode, but how babies with achondroplasia are born with a gibbus in their spine, which is the lower back curve. So we are, as we said, unable to use slings, carriers, safe chairs, bouncers, jumperoos, none of that. So again, like mourning the loss of that, because that makes parenting a little bit easier with those tools. And I mean, Alba loved her jumperoo. It does break my heart that Arlo won't be using it, but we will find other ways to have fun. So it's recommended that babies with achondroplasia have lie flat car seats, and the more they lie flat at this stage in their life, the more likely that the curve is likely to rectify when they start walking. It can actually go. I think the research shows that, which is, why they spend a lot of time on their backs and why tummy time is really encouraged, and the MRIs of head and spine to monitor those things as well. Yeah, I mean, bone wise as well, they can also have bowing legs. So the legs can slightly curve kind of that way or that way, inwards or outwards, and they'll be monitored for those as well. But I mean, it's quite nice at the moment. I don't want to like tempt fate, but we don't actually have any London appointments. It's just local now. I guess we'll be seen by Evelina in the next 6 months, but yeah, we're finally at a point now where our gaps in appointments are getting larger, and you can kind of be like, right, this is life now, and we can relax a little bit more. And yeah.
The lie flat bit was the hardest bit for me because George hates lying flat. And I remember I couldn't eat, because when other babies are ready to transition into the upright buggy, George still had to be in the bassinet. And it got to the point where I couldn't even leave the house with him in the pram because he would scream. I couldn't even walk 100 metres down the road because it would be intolerable screaming. And I remember just having a bit of a mental breakdown, pleading with the Evelina to allow me to get a carrier. They still said no, but I went onto the Facebook forums, achondroplasia ones, and I think there are other mums that used a Baby Bjorn one. So I went that night and bought one, and that has literally been game changing for me. We're not supposed to use it. I have guilt every time I use it, but I can't leave the house without it. That's where we are.
That's a good point that you make though, Fran, because you need to have clinical advice and the shoulds, and then you've got life and you've got practicalities. And actually, a baby, I don't actually think Alba ever laid in her bassinet, and she doesn't have achondroplasia. So that is a mum problem. That's not necessarily something for them. But obviously, they naturally spend more time on their backs because you're meant to place them on their backs more. And I've become really conscious of that now Arlo's a bit older, and try how we can make them feel included cognitively. But yeah, that's mum struggle. I mean, I know there'll be loads of mums that have been in similar positions. I remember when Alba was born and we did a seafront walk, and Lloyd just ended up holding her the whole time, and this bassinet looks brand new because we just never used it. But like you said, they then grow quite quickly and go into the bigger prams, which ours couldn't, and that makes it even more difficult. Fran, on that note, do you want to talk a bit about milestones and the fact the boys will have delayed milestones?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I think with achondroplasia babies, actually, some of the time, you can't really notice any difference. But as they start to get older and other babies are starting to hold their head up or roll or sit or, pull to stand, all these kind of stuff, our babies take much longer to do that. So any new mum will be given sort of the advice around the milestones, and there will be a range for other babies, which will be sort of not too big, but there will be a range. However, for achondroplasia babies, the range is for them hitting their milestones is actually really, really big. Some babies can hit milestones not too far off average height babies. So, for example, George started rolling at around 6 months, which isn't too far off average baby. He still can't sit, and he's 1. But just to give you an idea, some achondroplasia babies will start walking from around, I think, 1 year old, I think is the earliest that they recorded a baby walking. But conversely, there's babies with achondroplasia who still haven't started walking, gone 2.5 years old, and actually that's still classed as normal. So you can see the range there for the hitting milestones is huge. It's really enormous, and that range is still considered normal. And it's a bit like that for most of the milestones, to be honest. Yeah,
You're
that's
handed you're kind you're kind of given a achondroplasia sheet of milestones. I personally don't look at it very much. I think I tend to just kind of log his weight, height, and head circumference because I'm just of I mean, achondroplasia or not, I just feel like babies will get there when they're ready, and if not, it's when you kind of seek help. And I think you can get a bit obsessed with it all if you're watching a sheet. So we don't use our red book. We have our own sheets that we have to take in, and we've had to kind of share those locally and print those out, put them in our red book.
yeah, and there's a couple of special milestones that achondroplasia babies will hit, called a snowplow. So there is a reverse snowplow and then just the normal straightforward snowplow, which for an average baby it looks like a very, very strange movement, but for our babies they're totally normal things to do. And actually our babies will find weird and wonderful ways of moving and getting about and adapting and doing things the way that they can. So a snowplow, a reverse one, is when they're laid on their back and they arch their back, so their forehead's almost on the floor, and their body's in like a C shape, and then they push off on their legs, so they scoot backwards.
Yeah,
So that's
they're
the
kind of
reverse one.
cleverly using their head weight to maneuver and pivot.
And then a normal snowplow is when they're up on their hands and feet, fully lifted, so their chest is off the floor, but their head and their forehead again is touching the floor, and then they move forward. So it's like they're using their head as another limb essentially, because their heads they're very head heavy for them. So in order for them to do these movements and crawl comfortably, that's how some babies manage it.
Um, and they're all at really different stages. Like George is our group pro. He is kind of pulling up on things, and he kind of flips onto his front and lifts his head up. Arlo was quite delayed with that. He's just started holding his head up and moving around and getting some strength in that, which is so nice to see. And it's definitely helping his interaction with his sister as well. And she's getting a little bit more back from him, so that's really cute to watch. But yeah, the cognitive part now is quite fun watching them. I think when they're babies, you have worries: are they going to do this? They're going to do that, and then suddenly you're getting a bit more interaction from them, and it just reassures and calms the mind for sure.
Yeah, just on the milestones as well. George, his gross motor milestones are quite good, but because he can't sit, what our physio has advised us is George at 1, he still can't clap or point or wave or do anything like that. And actually, some babies will. I think Lorcan's really good at doing that, isn't he? He's the pro. But the physio advised us until he starts sitting, they don't always get the motivation to do it because they're not in that position where it feels natural for them to do it. So that's another example of achondroplasia babies not hitting sort of milestones in the conventional way.
Yeah, Arlo is really rudely just saying dada, dada, dada all the time, and I'm like, no, dada, mama. And we don't know if he started saying yeah, but whether it's just another noise. And we think he can say granddad too,
Yeah.
but we don't know if that's just wishful thinking. But no, mama, yet. I'll be waiting. Actually, 14 months, no sitting, no, mama. We've got work to do. But yeah, he like you said, Fran, he can't sit. His head strength is definitely a lot better. But he, in my opinion, is kind of nowhere near sitting. He's definitely building up leg strength, like you said, with the reverse snowplow. And if he's leaning on me, he's starting to kind of push up off his feet. And but yeah, the no sitting thing is really hard for them at this age. And actually, I had a bit of a wake up call the other day cognitively because we took Alba to Peppa Pig Live for her birthday, and um, he loved it. And I nearly didn't take him because in my head I'm like, his baby, he's on a lap, like he'll get bored. He's quite wriggly at the moment because he's in between. He was literally like, and I was like, of course he's like that because he's cognitively at the right age. So it really made me think, right,
Yeah.
time to step my game up with the classes. And I know you're really good at taking George to sensory and stuff, but it's because you're still looking at them and thinking they're the size of like a 3, 4 month old. You have to remind yourselves as parents that they are, at this age. Alba was running, I mean, Alba walked at 11 months, so it wasn't the best comparable for our poor Arlo, but you know, you have to, for me, constantly have to remind myself that to treat him cognitively at the age he's at. And I know they said that when he started nursery. I remember the Evelina OT saying that, like, they must move up into the older classes and groups when the others do, because it's really important that they're treated around their cognitive age, not, and their age, not their physical, their height and how they look. So that, yeah, that's a really important thing to mention, actually. Um, so it is Dwarfism Awareness Month, and Friday it was the Dwarfism Awareness Day when this first episode, part one, was released. We continuously try to kind of do things and raise awareness for charities. I've rather stupidly signed up for a half marathon on March the 2nd, which I really need to start training for. I'm like really avoiding, and it's a horrible one to do because I have to train all over winter. But I will be doing that for Little People UK, which is charity which is founded by Warwick Davis. And there is also the Dwarf Sports Association, which do a load of amazing work with children and adults with achondroplasia and dwarfism, which I know we will get more links into as we grow older. We've also got a dad in the group who is football mad and is really keen on getting a football team together. And there's a lot of pressure from us mums to get the boys into the Paralympics of some sort. But yeah, we hope to kind of embrace that together with them as they grow, and definitely give those charities a follow, because the more following and support they get, the better for them. And I guess I just wanted us to talk a little bit about the mental health support. I know you said yours was good and you were already kind of linked in when George was born. I didn't have such a journey. I had to actually make a formal complaint about my care once I'd got through that foggy part. I'd had some quite bad failings in my care. I was given 2 unscreened blood transfusions and found that out the day I got the diagnosis, I think. So that was kind of parked, and we had to kind of feed that back, and still in that process, actually. This is really the reason that Postnatal Minds was born, because I went through this whole process, and I actually self-referred to wellbeing service as well, and again had a really poor experience, and are finally getting some amazing support through the Evelina clinical psychologist, who has been amazing and really got me through a place I was really stuck in, around acceptance and being able to kind of move forward. But I do think now, you're just there, Fran, now, but I do think, like, for me, around that 12, 13 month mark was like just a bit of a reset, and that familiarity of the appointments, and just you're getting to know your baby when you have a baby, and then you're getting to know a disorder too. And I think that you time is the only gift, really, in feeling confidence and feeling better. Um, and all of the emotions that we have felt, and the tears that we've shared, and screams we've screamed, are total normal reactions to the traumatic things that we have been through. It's hard when people say you're so brave, because I've, you don't want to have to be brave. You just do. You just are, because you are their mum and you are their family. I hope that Postnatal Minds will be a place that people can come to if they are stuck, because a 6-week GP check for someone who, even without clinical diagnosis, isn't enough. And people are having to wait like 2 years for their birth reflections, you know, and it's not going to get any better. Um, I love the NHS, and I've just left the NHS after 16 years. I really hope that Postnatal Minds will be able to fill a gap for people that can't get help anywhere else. I'm proud of you and us for being able to speak so openly about extremely hard, challenging times. And if we'd gone into detail about all of the things we've been through, these podcasts would have been hours long. We've probably skimmed the surface of a lot of it, Fran, haven't we? So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything you'd add, Fran, and whether you feel like I know there'll be things when we finish where we're like, oh, we missed that, we missed that. You know, we haven't talked about certain things like treatments that are becoming available via research studies, and that's a whole other episode. Ellie Simmons has done an episode on that, hasn't she, on BBC, which is also worth a watch if you're interested in learning more about that. But yeah, I just wanted to give those charities a shout out, really, and just normalize all of the emotions that one might go through when receiving a clinical diagnosis like this during any stage of pregnancy.
Yeah, it's so important to reach out and get help. Luckily, as I said, the minute that George was born, I was absolutely fine. That, like, I was, tired, overwhelmed, emotional, but like I was feeling positive, I was feeling good. But actually, when I reflect back on that, I do think I felt like that because I knew I had almost like an army of people supporting me. I had, the crisis team at the hospital. I had mental health people in the community coming to visit me at my home. I had the midwives. I'm also very fortunate enough to get private healthcare through my work. So I put myself with a private therapist, and I had so many sessions with her, and she was like my guardian angel. So professionally, I had, so much support mentally. And then I think importantly for as well, which we mustn't overlook, is one of the really, really big things that helps through and is still helping me through now is the network and the communities that we've got. And, and you and our WhatsApp group and the girls and the other mums in that are an absolute lifeline. I've got the mums that I did my antenatal classes with, and we're a really strong, tight group there as well, but they don't have the experiences that we do with achondroplasia babies. So, for anyone listening to this and thinking, gosh, I can't get the professional help, find your tribe, find any friends or other mums that are going through similar experiences, because to be honest, they're just as good, if not better, because, they're raw, they're feeling the emotions, and they're saying things that, no one actually wants to say, and they're a safe place and understand from a real lived perspective.
Yeah, that is such an amazing point. And actually, a point that I really want to make within that, which you just made me think of, is that is so up and down. So one day can feel like, yeah, I've got this, like I'm gonna be fine. And then the next day you can be full of emotion or anxiety, or something happens that's not related at all and it just makes you think of something. I know recently we were talking about, 'cause there's people in our WhatsApp group that are earlier on in their journeys than us, and sometimes it throws you back, and there might be times where you have to dip out of that group and be like, I'm not in a place where I can reply to that today, but it's such a safe space. And when we met, it was like this magical feeling of like, I can relax because all of you get it. And there'll just be days, like someone even today was like, I'm having a moment, let it all out. And there was a bit of reassurance, a bit of like, right, practical advice. And it was like, right, okay, thanks. And that's what, like your tribe, your village, that's what it's all about. And actually, that's applicable, in my opinion, to anyone in motherhood, even without the diagnosis. Like, by talk about it, talk about the lack of sleep, talk about the thoughts you're having. People that have had children with cognitive diagnoses or delays or all these things that can make you feel isolated or different. That's okay. It's okay to be different. Let's talk about it. And that's I think is a really nice note to finish on. So we hope that you've learned about achondroplasia. We hope you've done it justice. And I just want to again thank you, Fran, for coming on and sharing some, if not the most difficult points of your life, and openly talking about your mental health struggles. Because the more we open up these conversations, the more we will make it feel okay for others, and that's what this is all about. So yeah, thank you for being amazing. And when I publish this episode, I'm going to post a picture of the boys, which Fran's consented to because they're just yummy. I mean, they're a bit older than that now, but they're still scrummy. And I really need to see George soon because I need a fix. So, but I know we'll be seeing you soon. But Thanks so much for
Yeah.
watching, or if you're listening, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time. And if you're not already, then please subscribe and like the channel, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much. Bye.